Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Madrid and Expodronica. I hope you are enjoying this important event that this year brings together the ATM and drone world. I'm Andrés López from the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, Ministry of Transport, Mobility and the Urbana Agenda. It's a pleasure for me to moderate this session on EU space. Today, I'm with people who are well known to all of you and who belong to organizations with a specific high weight in the development of EU space. We have with us Koen from GUTMA, Secretary General, Munish, Khurana, Senior Manager, ATM UTM Business Development at EUROCONTROL, Amit Ganjoo, CEO of ANRA Technologies and a GUTMA board member, Christoph Raab, Secretary General of Alliance for New Mobility Europe. As you know, over the last few years, we've seen a great boost in the drone sector and their applications. However, the development of full potential of these aircraft requires the safe and efficient integration and management of drones in airspace. As you are aware, the development of EU space is currently being promoted at European level. 3 regulations have already been published, which form a specific regulatory framework for EU space development. However, this is still work to be done. In order to give visibility and shed some light on the current state of development of EU space, I would like to ask you 3 questions. We have with us to Koen, the boss, as I said, Amit Ganjoo, Munish, Khurana, and Christoph Raab. The first question is, how are the drone ecosystem and the EU space developing in the EU as compared to other regions? Please, Koen.
Thank you, Andrés. Thank you for the question. Happy to be here and happy to see so many people interested in this panel. Now, as GUTMA, we are a little bit privileged and we were happy to work at the global level. What we did is we tried to compare the different regions. Where are we somewhere with the development of the UTM system, which would allow the drones and automated BVLOS operations to take off. And we produced these timelines of 4 regions where we compared where are we somewhere in Europe, where are we somewhere in the US, in Japan, and in Australia. You will see we try to highlight with these timelines, we try to get together what are all the important milestones towards this ultimate goal. Because as GUTMA, we try to promote a thriving drone service ecosystem. We would like to see many drone service providers in this merging as an ecosystem in this new world. And you will see that when we compare the different regions, only Europe has a flag planted in 2023 where formally and regulatory speaking, automated BVLOS operations will become possible. I leave here my 2 minutes for the first question.
Yeah.
You can have a look at these timelines. They will also be published on the GUTMA website. And I leave it now to the colleagues to complete.
What's your view, Munish?
Thank you, Andrés, and great to be here. I think that my biggest happiness of being here is not just seeing you all, but also the fact that for the next half an hour, I don't need to wear a mask. That's quite handy. Anyway, I come from EUROCONTROL, and we are in the business of supporting European aviation. Specifically within the U-Space UTM world, we are working to integrate the ATM with the U-Space and UTM. That's where we position ourselves. I totally agree with Koen on this one.
Thank you.
If you look at the timeline, it's clear that different regions have started at different times. They were probably governed or driven by the fact that they had different needs in each region. But what is important is to look at where we are today. I'll talk about Europe. I think in Europe itself, we are blessed that we have a number of jurisdictions within the European Union, which gives us the opportunity to gather right things, correct things, and challenges from different people. Some people think this is a weakness, but actually in Europe we've been able to convert that weakness into our strength, because the European Commission has played and EASA have played a great role by bringing in all these various views together to bring out the legislation which is out, and now we're focusing on implementing them. So I'll leave my speech for now and then detail more later.
Amit, what do you think?
Koen and Munish, first of all, thank you for having me here. Amit with ANRA Technologies. And looking at the timeline there, I was just thinking we have touch points as an organization in all four timelines. And it's been an interesting evolution starting with back in 2015 when we were formed to see how the regulatory framework and the technology roadmap has evolved across different zones. And Koen and Munish rightfully pointed out there are some regions that started early and kind of started running, and then brakes were kind of put and things slowed down, and then regulatory frameworks in other regions came along. So if I was to compare just two for now, this US and Europe, U-Space, we have the regulation that's going to go into effect in January 2023. But in US, on the other side, I'm on FAA's Aviation Rulemaking Committee as well. So now we are looking at what does it take to move to automated flight rules? How do we move from operations from exception to routine BVLOS operations? So that's going to take time. So in terms of timeline, you're looking at another, by the time this thing, what we are doing goes into rulemaking, it's probably another 12, 18 months or so. I can go into more details later, but that's where it is at a high level.
Okay, thank you. What is your view, Christoph?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you also for having us here. So the Alliance for New Mobility Europe is an organization for all drone stakeholders and anything unmanned. And we work for the integration of these devices, services, and products into the existing infrastructures. And so we have created this alliance because we see a shift in time in the way we do regulation in comparison to how we've done it in the past few years. So what could I add? Because obviously I would agree with what you've said very much, that it's the variety of test beds that we have, that made the richness, and then a good European framework on top that brings it all together. I think one dimension I could add, what makes Europe stand out from other regions, is probably the focus on quality of regulation, not even coming from the drone world, but let me bring the keyword of GDPR, for example, or certain other quality requirements that we are forced to comply with, but that make a high quality at the end of the day of the regulation. May not always bring the highest speed, but I think it brings a unique feature to the regulation in Europe. And I think overall, I would like to qualify, some of you have probably heard me say that before, as what we do as the regulation, not really a sprint, not really a marathon. It feels more like a sprint marathon, right? I mean, we're hasting from one step to the other, but it's a long, long race. And we would advocate that now maybe is the time that we make a bit of a change, rather than hastily doing one sensible thing after the other, that we flip it around, take a view from an end state, trying to think out what do we want this overall environment and architecture to look like, even if you can't see all details, and then think backwards from there. Of course, you have to work forward at the same time, but I think it's time now to think it from the end state, and that's what we advocate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We are going with the second question, which is very interesting from my side. What are the factors behind the progress in the European Union?
That's a very interesting question.
Please be aware the clock
is ticking.
Is ticking.
The clock is ticking in all senses here. And the different questions are very linked to each other, and the colleagues already touched upon it, how Europe as a fragmented area of 27 different legislations where Europe did not have yet competence, union competence, to regulate the smaller drones below 150 kilograms, and that just or explained why Europe started so late, how we could flip this disadvantage into an advantage, and where we were able to work together and come up with such results. And I think in this success, it's always also the recognition of this new phenomenon. Drones are an extension of aviation. They can fly everywhere. And if they can fly everywhere, those small drones, still considered to be aircraft, this means that you have to widen the stakeholders around the table. So we must also open up beyond aviation and going to speak with the cities which will be involved. We are dealing with, instead of having many big aircraft, we are dealing with mass consumer products. So what did the union have in its sleeve to regulate these mass consumer products? We had the CE marking. So we were able to include non-aviation elements in this new world. If you compare that to other regions, they keep more closely, they are looking more closely within the aviation silo. And the US, for instance, to compare it to US, they don't have such a thing. So the one of the contributors to success is the openness of the partners, of the regulators, to look for existing material, to bring that into this new drone world, to extend the current aviation framework.
Thank you. Let's see, Amit.
I'll take a slightly different take on this, because I'm an engineer by trade, so I'd like to decompose things into simpler things, right? So if you look at this paradigm, the challenge we are trying to solve, there are two aspects of it. There's the technical aspect of it and a regulatory aspect of it. So technically, the challenges can be solved, and then all the technical implementation interoperability standards will have a regulatory overlay. But the regulatory overlay will vary based on region, and in Europe between different countries potentially based on the business model, because technically you can solve the problem, but there are different, this problem is technical as well as a business problem, because this is going to disrupt a lot of traditional business models. So how do you address the business model implications, and that will in essence impact the regulations as well. In US we had a pretty, from that complexity point of view, it's a bigger thing, but it's simpler to solve because the regulator and the air navigation service provider is the same entity, like a FAA, and there's a model that's already been agreed to between the industry and the regulator. In Europe, it's still in the works, and you started with Part 107, now moving to operations by exception, like we had pilot projects, a bunch of them, and now moving into BV loss arc and stuff. So I think in terms of timeline with the use space regulation coming in here, a lot of stuff will happen. And I think there's a lot of cross-pollination that needs to happen, because there are some best practices that can be taken from both the places, so you can cross-pollinate versus trying to do things in vacuum. Neither is perfect, but neither is bad either. So.
Thank you. Your view, Munish?
Thank you, Andres. Just building on what my colleague said, the question I think was, why have we been able to bring use space and UTM to this stage so far? There are many aspects my colleagues have covered. One aspect that I want to share with you is this is probably the first time that the conventional aviation stakeholders are having to work with non-conventional aviation stakeholders. So Amit is absolutely right to use the word disruptive. This is probably, I come from a conservative, traditional aviation background at EUROCONTROL. And we are having to deal with the telecoms people, the health industry for using drones to be able to deliver parcels, with the construction industry, with the internet guys and so on. So we traditionally have worked and spoken different languages, so we are having to talk the same language. That's one thing. What are we doing and how have we countered it? Well, one aspect that we have used is that 4 organizations, that's European Commission, EUROCONTROL, CIRCE Joint Undertaking, and EASA, have come together to create a platform called the European Network of Use-Based Demonstrators. And in this network, what we try to do is to bring stakeholders from all the various different industries together and share lessons learned. And you'll be surprised to know how much we have learned in a way that we help others avoid making the same mistakes again and again. So this is one of the big areas that is learning from each other and sharing our lessons learned.
Thank you, Munish. Christoph, please.
What's the success factor you've asked for drone regulation in Europe? Well, I think I would mention, first of all, there's been a very high political will. I think that's a big push from the top down. So I think that's been one important ingredient. And second, I think that the regulatory path and speed and method that was chosen was highly credible. And I think that was giving a lot of, startups, small ones, those that give funding the courage actually to go forward, even if it was a bit into the unknown. But that's why I say, okay, it's time now to define a bit more of an end state. Yeah, there was a credibility for a long time, but now we need timelines, reliable timelines. So I think those are two important factors for success. And Koen, one point you mentioned, I wanted to elaborate a bit more on. Yes, we don't need to invent everything inside the aviation and drone world. We can't. Otherwise, we're going to regulate until the cows come home. So there are solutions. Let me mention two examples that for technologies we want to use: AI, cybersecurity. Here you have standards, procedures, quality certifications from other areas that we may be able to just apply with minimal adaptation rather than going through the whole process inside our own sector by ourselves. I think that's a major factor to keep up the speed, and therefore we need more dialogue. We need to reach out further. So the bad news is it's not getting any easier, it's rather getting more complex actually to move the drone regulation forward, because we need more and more others to work with, to integrate with, and to lend their solutions to bring us forward more quickly.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Integration. And to finalize, how could we make this progress sustainable?
Yeah.
Please, Koen.
That's a big question, and it was already touched upon in the previous answers. I think we have to recognize that the drones are really a societal issue. Do we want the drones to fly everywhere? Do we really want to have that? If you have discussion with friends behind a pint of beer, I frequently have the question, "Cool, are you crazy? I don't want to have that. I don't want to have that here over my garden or whatever." And these are the big questions, and that's why it's also, as already mentioned, it is a political issue. And we have to make sure that we integrate all the dimension of these political issues, of GDPR, of environmental things, of noise and so on, that we integrate it in this regulatory issue. Amit is right that we have technological problems, but that is only one pillar of the issues that we have to treat. Yesterday we have been discussing open source standards coming from IT that we would like to apply in aviation. This is revolution in aviation. But these are the things that we have to recognize. Use-based technologies and drone technologies, it's a mixture of aviation, of communications, and of IT. And if we can preserve this marriage of those three strands of technologies together with the corresponding processes and stakeholders and so on, then we will be able to build up on this success, I think, and we hope.
Thank you, Koen. Please, Munish.
Thank you, Andres. Building on the previous answer, at EUROCONTROL we are doing a number of things to make sure that this ongoing progress is sustainable. We are leading and participating in R&D activities, which are CIRCE and Horizon 2020 projects. And our flagship project is CHORUS XUM, where we're looking at urban air mobility, on how to develop the concept of operations. We're supporting EASA and standards bodies to technically, from a technical point of view, to come up with the regulations that are technically feasible and doable, and from a standards point of view, to give them our technical and operational input. We are running, as I said, a shared sharing of lessons learned platform, along with EASA, European Commission, and CIRCE joint undertaking. At the same time, we are supporting member states of Europe in conducting airspace assessments. So one of the first things that anyone that wants to implement use-based regulation is to figure out what exists right now in the skies above that city or a region. Now, being technical operational people ourselves, and we are facilitators and supporters of aviation in Europe, we are working with at least 6 to 10 member states, European member states, to conduct independent safety assessment, to guide them on what's available today, and based on what their objectives are in future, whether they want to deliver parcels in urban mobility environment or to provide services in a rural environment, advise them on what they need to do to reconfigure their airspace to have the operations up and running. And last but not least, we're also part of a consortium with the CIRCE joint undertaking where, despite all the various research projects that are ongoing, we're working behind the scenes to make sure that anything that comes out of these projects, it comes together into an overall concept of operation, which leads us not in a fragmented but in a harmonized way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Amit?
I think a lot was said, but the only thing I would add is I always like to use the phrase crawl, walk, and run, because if we overnight expect to solve the problem, that's not going to happen. To make something sustainable, you have to take the baby steps, and it's an iterative model. So you're not going to solve the everything together. And like Munish and Koen mentioned, you need to look at technical interoperability standards. And you don't want to build something that is stovepiped and proprietary that doesn't interoperate, because I come from the telecom legacy, like my background. And if you remember, like 15 years back, if you picked up a phone in Spain and went to somewhere in North America, your phone stopped working because they were using different technology, GSM, CDMA, and stuff. We don't want to be in a similar situation with the US, right? Because eventually you're going to have cross-border operations, and the systems need to be interoperable. They need to be built on standards. And so those are some of the things that need to be considered to make it sustainable, whether it's small US or as you transition into UAM world, which we are working on, and what the interfaces should be there and stuff like that.
Thank you. Briefly, Christoph?
Yes. So how do we keep up the speed? Two bottlenecks and, can I say, two facilitators. One bottleneck, I would say, are EASA's capacities. And that's not to say anything negative about EASA. I mean, these people are doing a great job and working hard. But the political masters that have given the additional competences to EASA a few years ago, I think, forgot a bit to beef it up with capacity. So we think that's a bottleneck that might risk slowing down the regulation and should be changed. Second, standards have been mentioned, and it's going to be more important than so far that we get the right coordination mechanism. Who creates them, how, and what timeline, and who has a coordinating role? That's a question that needs to be answered. And two facilitators, CIRCE has been mentioned. Let me say, to keep that speed forward, we need to give especially SMEs, who are really the innovators, certainty, predictability, planability. That's why I mentioned the end state vision. And I think CESAR 3 is a great vehicle, one, to help SMEs as well and bring them together with other system integrators and keep up the speed. Thank you.
Thank you. So to finalize, I would ask you one sentence for a conclusion to close the meeting, this session. Please, Koen, could you summarize? Conclusion. Your conclusion.
Thank you, Andres. GUTMA will do everything to build a thriving drone service ecosystem, because we think there the value for the whole society will be created.
Munish?
Thank you. The ecosystem of drone services and use space, this is an irreversible process. We're going ahead with it. It's optimism we want, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we do it safely so that the interests and lives of common citizens are protected.
Christoph?
You all know the story of the hare and the hedgehog. The hare is always running, the hedgehog is always first. Let's turn from the hare to become the hedgehog.
Thank you. Amit?
I'll say we should look at cooperation versus competition, because if we don't cooperate in today's young industry, there won't be an industry to compete in down the line.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for your contribution. I hope that this panel has been of interest of all of you and that it serves to illustrate some of the issues that we will have to work in the short and medium term to implement this concept in an efficient way in Europe.
Thank you, Andres.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.